The Dancing Girls by Edna Ferber. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Chenevert. The Dancing Girls by Edna Ferber. When, on opening a magazine, you see a picture of a young man in uniform with a background of assorted star shells in full flower, a young man in uniform gazing into the eyes of a young lady in uniform, a young man in uniform crouching in a trench, dugout, or shell hole, this happens. You skip lightly past the story of the young man in uniform, you jump hurriedly over the picture, and you plunge into the next story, noting that it is called The Crimson Emerald, and that, judging from the pictures, all the characters in it wear evening clothes all the time. Chug Scarrett took his dose of war with the best of them, but this is of Chug before and after taking. If inadvertently there should sound a faintly martial note, it shall be stifled at once with a series of those stylish dots, indicative of what the early Victorian writers conveniently called a drawn veil. Nothing could be fairer than that. Chug Scarrett was, and is, the proprietor and sole owner of the Elite Garage, and he pronounced it with a long I. Automobile parties touring Wisconsin used to mistake him for a handyman about the place and would call to him, "Hey, boy, come here and take a look at this engine. She ain't hittin'." When Chug finished with her, she was hitting all right. A medium-sized young fellow in the early 20s with a serious mouth, laughing eyes, and a muscular grace pretty well concealed by the grease-grimed grotesquerie of overalls. Out of the overalls, and in his tight-fitting belted green suit and long-visored green cap and flat russet shoes, he looked too young and insouciant to be the sole owner, much less the proprietor, of anything so successful and established as the Elite Garage. In a town like Chippewa, Wisconsin, or in any other sort of town for that matter, a prosperous garage knows more about the scandals of the community than does a barber shop, a dressmaker by the day, or a pool-room habitué. It conceals more skeletons than the catacombs. Chug Scarrett, had he cared to open his lips and speak, might have poured forth such chronicles as to make Spoon River sound a paean of sweetness and light. He knew how much old man Hatton's chauffeur knocked down on gas and repairs. He knew just how much the Tillotsons had gone into debt for their twin six, and why Emil Soder drove to Oshkosh so often on business, and who supplied the flowers for Mrs. McGurney's Electric. Chug didn't encourage gossip in his garage. Whenever possible he put his foot down on its ugly head in a vain attempt to crush it, but there was something about the very atmosphere of the place that caused it to thrive and flourish. It was like a combination newspaper office and Pullman car smoker. Chug tried to keep the thing down, but there might generally be seen lounging about the doorway or perched on the running board of an idle car a little group of slim, flat-heeled, low-voiced young men in form-fitting, high-waisted suits of that peculiarly virulent shade of green which makes its wearer look as if he had been picked before he was ripe. They were a lean, slim-flanked crew with a feline sort of grace about them, terse of speech, quick of eye, engine-wise, and generally nursing a boil just above the collar of their soft shirt. Not vicious, not even tough. Rather bored, though they didn't know it, in their boredom resorting to the only sort of solace afforded boys of their class in a town of Chippewa's size: cheap amusements, cheap girls, cheap talk. This last, unless the topic chanced to be of games or of things mechanical. Baseball or a sweet running engine brought out the best that was in them. At their worst, perhaps, they stood well back in the dim, cool shade of the garage doorway to watch how, when the girls went by in their thin summer dresses, the strong sunlight made a transparency of their skirts. At supper time they would growl to their surprised sisters, "Put on some petticoats, you. Way you girls run around, it's enough to make a person sick." Chug Scarrett escaped being one of these by a double margin. There was his business responsibility on one side, his very early history on the other. Once you learn the derivation of Chug's nickname, you have that history from the age of 5 to 25 inclusive. Chug had been christened Floyd. She had got it out of a book, but it was an appendix rather than an appellation. No one ever dreamed of addressing him by that misnomer, unless you except his schoolteachers. Once or twice the boys had tried to use his name as a weapon, shrieking in a shrill falsetto and making 2 syllables of it. He put a stop to that soon enough with his fists and feet. His virility could have triumphed over a name twice as puerile. For that matter, I once knew a young husky named Fayette but that's another story. The Scarretts lived the other side of the tracks. If you know Chippewa, or its equivalent, you get the significance of that. Nobodies. Not only did they live the other side of the tracks, they lived so close to them that the rush and rumble of the passing trains shook the 2-story frame cottage and rattled the crockery on the pantry shelves. The first intelligible sound the boy made was a chesty chug chug chug, in imitation of a panting engine tugging its freight load up the incline toward the junction. When Chug ran away, which was on an average of twice daily, he was invariably to be found at the switchman's shanty or roaming about the freight yards. It got so that Stumpy Gans, the one-legged switchman, would hoist a signal to let Mrs. Scarrett know that Chug was safe. He took his first mechanical toy apart, piece by piece. "Wait till your pa comes home," his mother had said with terrible significance. Chug, deep in the toy's wreckage, seemed undismayed. So Mrs. Scarrett gave him a light promissory slap and went on about her housework. That night before supper, Len Scarrett addressed his son with a sternness quite at variance with his easy-going nature. "Come here to me. Now then, what's this about your smashing up good toys, huh? What do you mean? Christmas not 2 days back, and here you go smashing—" The culprit trotted over to a corner and returned with the red-painted tin thing in his hand. It was as good as new. There may even have been some barely noticeable improvement in its locomotive powers. Chug had merely taken it apart in order to put it together again, and he had been too absorbed to pause long enough to tell his mother so. After that, nothing that bore wheels, internally or externally, was safe from his investigating fingers. It was his first velocipede that really gave him his name. As he rode up and down, his short legs working like piston rods gone mad, pedestrians would scatter in terror. His onrush was as relentless as that of an engine on a track, and his horse, chug chug dring dring, as he bore down upon a passerby, caused that one to sidestep precipitously into the gutter, and none too soon. Chug earned his first real bicycle, carrying a paper route for the Chippewa Eagle. It took him 2 years. By the time he had acquired it, he knew so much about bicycles, from ball bearings to handlebars, that its possession roused very little thrill in him. It was as when a lover has had to wait overlong for his bride. As Chug whizzed about Chippewa streets, ringing an unnecessarily insistent bell, you sensed that a motorcycle was already looming large in his mechanism-loving mind. By the time he was 17, Chug's motorcycle was spitting its way venomously down Elm Street, and the sequence of the seasons was not more inevitable than that an automobile should follow the motorcycle. True, he practically built it himself, out of what appeared to be an old washer-boiler, some wire, and an engine made up of parts that embraced every known car from Ford to Fiat. He painted it an undeniable red, hooded it like a demon racer, and shifted to first. The thing went. He was a natural mechanic. He couldn't spend a day with a piece of mechanism without having speeded it up or in some way done something to its belts, gears, wheels, motor. He was almost never separated from a monkey wrench or pliers, and he was always turning a nut or bolt or screw in his grease-grimed fingers. Right here it should be understood that Chug never became a Steinmetz or a Wright. He remained just average plus to the end, with something more than a knack at things mechanical. A good deal of grease beneath his nails, and generally a smudge under one eye, or a swipe of black across a cheek that gave him a misleadingly sinister and piratical look. There's nothing very magnificent, surely, in being the proprietor of a garage, even if it is the best paying garage in Chippewa, where 6 out of 10 families own a car, and summer tourists are as locusts turned beneficent. Sometime between Chug's motorcycle and the homemade automobile, Len Scarrett died. The loss to the household was social more than economic. Len had been one of those good-natured, voluble, walrus-mustached men who make such poor providers. A carpenter by trade, he had always been a spasmodic worker and a steady talker. His high, hollow voice went on endlessly above the fusillade of hammers at work and the clatter of dishes at home. Politics, unions, world events, local happenings, neighborhood gossip, all fed the endless stream of his loquacity. "Well, now, looky here. Take, for instance, one of these here big concerns." After he had gone, Mrs. Scarrett used to find herself listening to the silence. His ceaseless talk had often rasped her nerves to the point of hysteria, but now she missed it as we miss a dull ache to which we have grown accustomed. Chug was in his second year at the Chippewa High School. He had always earned some money, afternoons and Saturdays. Now he quit to go to work in earnest. His mother took it hard. "I wanted you to have an education," she said, "not just schooling, an education." Minnie Scarrett had always had ambition and a fierce sort of pride. She had needed them to combat Len's shiftlessness and slack good nature. They had kept her 2-story frame cottage painted and tidy, had her pride and ambition. They had managed a Sunday suit always for Chug, money for the contribution box, pork roast on Sundays, and a sitting room, chill but elegant, with its plump pyramids of pillows embroidered with impossible daisies and carnations and violets filling every corner. Mr. Scarrett had had to fight for Chug's 2 years of high school. "He don't need no high school," Len Scarrett had argued in one of the rare quarrels between the two. "I never had none." The retort to this was so obvious that his wife refrained from uttering it. Len continued, "He don't go with none of my money. His age I was working, and had been for 3 years and more. You'll be fixin' to send him to college next." "Well, if I do, then what?" "Then you're crazy," said Len without heat, as one would state a self-evident fact. That afternoon Mr. Scarrett went down to the office of the Eagle and inserted a neat ad. "Lace curtains done up like new, 25 cents a pair. Mrs. Scarrett, 639 Outagami Street." For years afterward you never passed the Scarrett place without seeing the long skeleton frames of wooden curtain stretchers propped up against the back porch in the sun. Mrs. Scarrett became famous for her curtains as an artist is known for his middle distances, his woodland green, or his flesh tones. In time even the Hattons, who had always heretofore sent their fine curtains to Milwaukee to be cleaned, trusted their lacy treasures to Mrs. Scarrett's expert hands. Chug went to high school on those lace curtains. He used to call for and deliver them. He rigged up a shelf-like device on his bicycle handlebars. On this the freshly laundered curtains reposed in their neat paper wrappings, as unwrinkled as when they had come from the stretching frame. At 17 he went to work at the Alight Garage. He hadn't been there a month before the owner was saying, "Say, Chug, take a look at this here bus, will you? She don't run right, but I can't find out what's got into her." Chug would put his ear to the heart of the car and tap its vitals and count its pulse beats as a doctor sounds you with his stethoscope. The look on his face was that of a violinist who tries his G-string. For the rest, he filled gas tanks, changed and pumped up tires, tested batteries, oiled tappets. But the thing that fascinated him was the engine. An oily, blue-eyed boy in spattered overalls, he was always just emerging from beneath a car or crawling under it. When a new car came in, en route, a proud, glittering affair, He always managed to get a chance at it somehow, though the owner or chauffeur guarded it ever so jealously. The only thing on wheels that he really despised was an electric brougham. Chippewa's well-paved streets made these vehicles possible. Your true garage man's feelings for electrics is unprintable. The least that they call them was juice boxes. At home, Chug was forever rigging up labor-saving devices for his mother. The Scarrett's window shades always rolled. Their doorbell always rang with a satisfying zing. Their suction pump never stuck. By the time he was 20, Chug was manager of the garage, and his mother was saying, "You're around that garage 16 hours a day. When you're home, you're everlastingly reading those engineering papers and things. Your pa, at your age, had a girl for every night in the week and 2 on Sundays. Another year or so, and I can buy out old Binky and own the place. Soon's I do, I'm going to come home in the speediest boat in the barn, and I'm going to bust up those curtain frames into kindling wood over my knee, and pile 'em in the backyard and make a bonfire out of 'em. They've been pretty good friends to us, Chug, those curtain frames. He glanced at her parboiled fingers. Just the same, it'll be nix with the lace curtains for you. Glancing back on what has been told of Chug, he sounds somehow so much like a modern Rollo with a dash of Alger that unless something is told of his social side, he may be misunderstood. Chug was a natural-born dancer. There are young men who, after the music has struck up, can start out incredibly enough by saying, "What is this, anyway, waltz or foxtrot?" This was inconceivable to Chug. He had never had a dancing lesson in his life, but he had a sense of rhythm that was infallible. He could no more have danced out of time than he could have started a car on high, or confused a flivver with a 12. He didn't look particularly swan-like as he danced, having large, sensible feet, but they were expert at not being where someone else's feet happened to be, and he could time a beat to the fraction of a second. When you have practically spent your entire day sprawled under a balky car, with a piece of dirty mat between you and the cement floor, your view limited to crankcase, transmission, universal, flywheel, differential, pan and brake rods, you can do with a bit of color in the evening, and just here was where Chippewa failed Chug. He had a grave problem confronting him in his search for an evening's amusement. Chippewa, Wisconsin, was proud of its paved streets, its 30,000 population, its lighting system, and the Greek temple that was the new First National Bank. It boasted of its interurban lines, its neat houses set well back along old elms, its paper mills, its plow works, and its prosperity. If you had told Chippewa that it was criminally ignoring Chug's crying need, it would have put you down as mad. Boiled down, Chug Scarrett's crying need was girls. At 22 or 3, you must have girls in your life if you're normal. Chug was, but Chippewa wasn't. It had too many millionaires at one end and too many laborers at the other for a town of 30,000. Its millionaires had their golf club, their high-powered cars, their smart social functions. They were always running down to Chicago to hear Golly Coochie. And when it came to costume, diamond bracelet, daring decollage, large feather fans, and brilliant buckled slippers, you couldn't tell their women from the city dwellers. There is much money in paper mills and plow works. The mill hands and their families were well-paid, thrifty, clannish Swedes, most of them, with a liberal sprinkling of Belgians and Slavs. They belonged to all sorts of societies and lodges, to which they paid infinitesimal dues and swore lifelong allegiance. Chug Scarrett and boys of his kind were left high and dry. So then when Chug went out with a girl, it was likely to be by way of someone's kitchen, or with one of those who worked in the rag room at the paper and pulp mill. They were the very girls who switched up and down in front of the garage evenings and Saturday afternoons. Many of them had been farm girls in Michigan or northern Wisconsin or even Minnesota. In Chippewa they did housework. Big, robust girls they were, miraculously well dressed, in good shoes and suits and hats. They had bad teeth for the most part, with a scum over them, over fond of coffee, and were rather dull company, but they were good-natured and hearty and generous. The paper mill girls were quite another type. Theirs was a grayish pallor, due to lungs dust-choked from work in the rag room. That same pallor promised ill for future generations in Chippewa. But they had a rather appealing, wistful fragility. Their eyes generally looked too big for their faces. They possessed, though, a certain vivacity and diabliere that the big, slower-witted Swede girls lacked. When Chug felt the need of a dash of red in the evening, he had little choice. In the winter he often went up to Woodman's Hall. The dances at Woodman's Hall were of the kind advertised at 50 cents a couple. Extra lady, 25 cents. Ladies without gents, 35 cents. Bergstrom's two-piece orchestra. Chug usually went alone, but he escorted home one of the ladies without gents. It was not that he begrudged the 50 cents. Chug was free enough with his money. He went to these dances on a last-minute impulse, almost against his will, and out of sheer boredom. Once there, he danced every dance and all the encores. The girls fought for him. Their manner of dancing was cheek to cheek in wordless rhythm, his arm about the ample waist of one of the Swedish girls, or clasping close the frail form of one of the mill hands. Chug would dance on and on, indefatigably, until the music played Home Sweet Home. The conversation, if any, varied little. "The music's swell tonight," from the girl. "Yeah, you're some little dancer, Chug, I'll say. Honest, I could dance with you forever." This with a pressure of the girl's arm, and spoken with a little accent, whether Swedish, Belgian, or Slavic. "They all say that." "Crazy about yourself, ain't you?" "Not as crazy as I am about you," with tardy gallantry. He was very little stirred, really. "Yeah, you are. I wish you was. It makes no never-minds to you who you're dancing with, so long as you're dancing." This last came one evening as a variant in the usual formula. It startled Chug a little, so that he held the girl off, the better to look at her. She was Wanda something or other, and anybody but Chug would have been alive to the fact that she had been stalking him for weeks with solid persistence. "Danced with you 3 times tonight, haven't I?" he demanded. He was rather surprised to find that this was so. "Wish it was 30." That was Wanda. Her very eagerness foiled her. She cheapened herself. When Chug said, "Can I see you home?" he knew the answer before he put the question. Too easy to get along with, Wanda. Always there ahead of time, waiting when you made a date with her. Too ready to forgive you when you failed to show up. Telephone you when you were busy. Didn't give a fellow a chance to come halfway, but went 7/8 of it herself. An ignorant, kindly, dangerous girl, with the physical development of a woman and the mind of a child. There were dozens like her in Chippewa. If the girls of his own class noticed him at all, it was the more to ignore him as a rather grimy mechanic passing briefly before their vision down Outagamie Street on his way to and from dinner. He was shy of them. They had a middle-class primness which forbade their making advances even had they been so inclined. Chug would no more have scraped acquaintance with them than he would have tried to flirt with Angie Hatton, Old Man Hatton's daughter, and the richest girl in Chippewa, so rich that she drove her own car with the chauffeur stuck up behind. You didn't have to worry about Wanda and her kind. There they were, take them or leave them. They expected you to squeeze their waist when you danced with them, and so you did. You didn't have to think about what you were going to say to them. Mrs. Scarrett suspected, in a vague sort of way, that Chug was running with the hired girls. The thought distressed her. She was too smart a woman to nag him about it. She tried diplomacy. "Why don't you bring some young folks home to eat, Chug? I'd like to fuss around for company." She was a wonderful cook, Mrs. Scarrett, and liked to display her skill. "Who is there to bring?" "The boys and girls you go around with. Who is it you're always fixing up for evenings?" "Nobody." Mrs. Scarrett tried another tack. "I suppose this house isn't good enough for 'em, is that it?" "Good enough?" Chug laughed rather grimly. "I'd like to know what's the matter with it." There was, as a matter of fact, Nothing the matter with it. It was as spick and span as paint and polish could make it. The curtain-stretching days were long past. There had even been talk of moving out of the house by the tracks, but at the last moment Mrs. Scarrett had rebelled. "I'll miss the sound of the trains. I'm used to 'em. It's got so I can tell just where my right hand'll be when the 7:52 goes by in the morning, and I've got used to putting on the potatoes when I hear the 11:40. Let's stay, Chug." So they had stayed. Gradually they had added an improvement here, a convenience there, as Chug's prosperity grew, until now the cottage by the tracks was newly painted, bathroomed, electric lighted, with a cement walk front and back, and a porch with a wicker swing and flower baskets. Chug gave his mother more housekeeping money than she needed, though she in turn served him meals that would have threatened the waistline of an older and less active man. There was a banana pie, for instance. It sounds sickish, but wait, which she baked in a deep pan, and over which she poured a golden brown custard, all flecked with crusty melted sugar. You took a bite, and lo, it had vanished like a sweet dewdrop, leaving in your mouth a taste as of nectar and clover honey and velvet cream. Mrs. Scarrett used to gauge Chug's plans for the evening by his ablutions. Elaborate enough at any time, on dance nights they amounted to a rite. In the old days, Chug's father had always made a brief enough business of the process he called washing up. A hand basin in the kitchen sink or on the back porch bench sufficed. The noises he made were all out of proportion to the results obtained. His snufflings and snortings and splashings were like those of a grampus at play. When he emerged from them, you were surprised to find that he had merely washed his face. Chug had grease to fight. He had learned how in his first days at the garage. His teacher had been old Rudy, a mechanic who had tinkered around automobiles since their kerosene days, and who knew more about them than their inventor. Soap and water alone were powerless against the grease and carbon and dust that ground themselves into Chug's skin. First he lathered himself with warm, soapy water. Then, while arms, neck, and face were still wet, he covered them with oil, preferably lubricating oil, medium. Finally he rubbed sawdust all over, great handfuls of it. The grease rolled out then, magically, leaving his skin smooth and white. Old Rudy, while advocating this process, made little use of it. He dispatched the whole grimy business by the simple method of washing in gasoline, guaranteed to take the varnish off a car fender. It seemed to leave Rudy's tough hide undevastated. At 24, Chug Scarrett was an upstanding, level-headed, and successful young man who worked hard all day and found himself restless and almost irritable toward evening. He could stay home and read, or go back to the garage, though after 8 things were very quiet. For amusement there were the pool shack, the cheap dances, the street corner, the YMCA. This last had proved a boon. The swimming pool, the gym, the reading room had given Chug many happy, healthful hours, but after all, there was something. Chug didn't know it was girls. Girls you could talk to and be with and take around, but it was. After an hour at the pool or around the reading table, or talking and smoking, he usually drifted out into the quiet street. He could go home, or there was Wanda. If he went home, he found himself snapping rather irritably at his mother for no reason at all, ashamed of doing it, powerless somehow to stop. He took to driving in the evening, long drives along the country roads, his cap pulled low over his eyes, the wind blowing fresh in his face. He used to cover mile on mile, sitting slumped low on his spine, his eyes on the road, the engine running sweet and true. Sometimes he took Wanda along, or one of the mill girls, but not often. They were disappointed if you didn't drive with one arm around them. He liked being alone. It soothed him. It was thus that he first met the Weld girl. The Weld girl was the plain daughter of the Widow Weld. The Widow Weld was a musical comedy sort of widow in French-heeled, patent leather slippers and girlish gowns. When you met her together with her daughter Elizabeth, you were supposed to say, "Not mother and daughter, surely not. Sisters, of course." Elizabeth was 24 and not a success. At the golf club dances on Saturday night she would sit, unsought, against the wall, while her skittish mother tripped it with the doggish bachelors. Sometimes a man would cross the floor toward her, and her heart would give a little leap, but he always asked the girl seated 2 chairs away. Elizabeth danced much better than her mother, much better than most girls for that matter, but she was small and dark and rather shy, and wore thick glasses that disguised the fineness of her black-lashed gray eyes. Now and then her mother, flushed and laughing, would come up and say, "Is my little girl having a good time?" The Wells had no money, but they belonged to Chippewa's fashionable set. There were those who lifted significant eyebrows at the mention of the Widow Wells' name, and it was common knowledge that no maid would stay with her for any length of time because of the scanty provender. The widow kowtowed shamelessly to the moneyed ones of Chippewa, flattering the women, flirting with the men. Elizabeth had no illusions about her mother, but she was stubbornly loyal to her. Her manner toward her kittenish parent was rather sternly maternal, but she was the honest sort that congenitally hates sham and pretense. She was often deliberately rude to the very people toward whom her mother was servile. Her strange friendship with Angie Hatton, the lovely and millioned, was the one thing in Elizabeth's life of which her Machiavellian mother approved. "Betty, you practically stuck out your tongue at Mr. Oakley." This after a dance at which Elizabeth had been paired off as usual with the puffy and red-eyed old widower of that name. "I don't care. His hands are fat, and he creaks when he breathes. Next to Hatton, he's the richest man in Chippewa, and he likes you." "He'd better not," she spat out, and the gray eyes blazed behind the glasses. "I'd rather be plastered up against the wall all my life than dance with him. Fat. Well, my dear, you're no beauty, you know," with cruel frankness. "I'm not much to look at," replied Elizabeth, "but I'm beautiful inside." "Rot," retorted Widow Weld inelegantly. Had you lived in Chippewa, all this explanation would have been unnecessary. In that terrifying way small towns have, it was known that of all codfish aristocracy the Widow Weld was the piscatorial pinnacle. When Chug Scarrett first met the Weld girl, she was standing out in the middle of the country road at 10:30 p.m., her arms outstretched and the blood running down one cheek. He had been purring along the road toward home, drowsy and lulled by the motion and the April air. His thoughts had been drowsy, too, and disconnected. "If I can rent Bergstrom's place next door when their lease is up, I'll knock down the partition and put in auto supplies. There's big money in them. Guess if it keeps on warm like this we can plant the garden next week. That was swell cake Ma had for supper. What's that in the road?" Jammed down the footbrake, jerked back the emergency. A girl standing in the road. A dark mass in the ditch by the roadside. He was out of his car. He recognized her as the Weld girl. "'Smatter?" "In the ditch. She's hurt. Quick." "Whose car?" Chug was scrambling down the banks. "Hatton's. Angie Hatton's." "Gosh." Over by the fence where she had been flung, Angie Hatton was found sitting up dizzily and saying, "Betty, Betty," in what she supposed was a loud cry, but which was really a whisper. "I'm all right, dear. I'm all right. Oh, Angie, are you—" She was cut and bruised, and her wrist had been broken. The two girls clung to each other wordlessly. The thing was miraculous, in view of the car that lay perilously tipped on its fender. "You're a lucky bunch," said Chug. "Who was driving?" "I was," said Angie Hatton. "It wasn't her fault," the Weld girl put in quickly. "We were coming from Winnebago. She's a wonderful driver. We met a farm wagon coming toward us. One of those big ones. The middle of the road. Perhaps he was asleep. He didn't turn out. We thought of course he would. At the last minute we had to try for the ditch. It was too steep. Anyway, you're nervy kids, both of you. I'll have you home in 20 minutes. We'll have to leave $5,000 worth of car in the road till morning. It'll be all right." He did get them home in 20 minutes, and the $5,000 worth of car was still lying repentantly in the ditch when morning came. Old Man Hatton himself came into the garage to thank Chug the following day. Chug met him in overalls, smudge-faced as he was. Old Man Hatton put out his hand. Chug grinned and looked at his own grease-grimed paw. "That's all right," said Old Man Hatton, and grasped it firmly. "Want to thank you." "That's all right," said Chug. "Didn't do a thing." "No business driving alone that hour of the night. Girls nowadays." He looked around the garage. "Work here, I suppose?" "Yes, sir." "Is there anything I can do for you over at the mill?" "Guess not," said Chug. "Treat you right here, do they?" "Fine." "Let's see, who owns this place?" "I do." Old Man Hatton's face broke into a sunburst of laugh wrinkles. He threw back his head and went the scale from roar to chuckle. "One on me. Pretty good. Have to tell Angie that one." Chug walked to the street with him. "Your daughter, she's got a lot of nerve, all right. And that girl with her, Weld. Say, not a whimper out of her, and the blood running down her face. She all right?" "Cut her head a little. They're both all right. Angie wouldn't even stay in bed. Well, as I say, if there's anything—" Chug flushed a little. "Tell you what, Mr. Hatton. I'm working on a thing that'll take the wine out of the Dacker." Old Man Hatton owned the Dacker motor plant, among other things. The Dacker is the best car for the money in the world. Not much for looks, but everything in the engine. And everyone who has ever owned one knows that its only fault is the way its engine moans. Dacker owners hate that moan. When you're going right, it sounds a pass between a peanut roaster and a banshee with bronchitis. Every engineer in the Dacker plant had worked over it. "Can't be done," said Old Man Hatton. "Another 3 months, and I'll show you." "Hope you do, son. Hope you do." But in another 3 months, Chug Scarrett was one of a million boys destined to take off a pink-striped shirt, a knobby-belted suit, and a long-visored cap, to don a rather bob-tailed brown outfit. It was some 18 months later before he resumed the chromatic clothes with an ardor all out of proportion to their style and cut. But in the interval between doffing pink-striped shirt and donning pink-striped shirt, no need to describe Camp Sibley, 2 miles outside Chippewa, and the way it grew miraculously overnight into a khaki city. No going into detail concerning the effective combination formed by Chug and a machine gun. These things were important and interesting, but perhaps not more interesting than the seemingly unimportant fact that in July following that April, Chug was dancing blithely and rhythmically with Elizabeth Weld and saying, "Angie Hatton's a smooth little dancer, all right, but she isn't in it with you." For Chippewa somehow had fused. Chippewa had forgotten sets, sections, cliques, factions, and parties, and formed a community. It had, figuratively, wiped out the railroad tracks, together with all artificial social boundaries. Chug Scarrett in uniform must be kept happy. He must be furnished with wholesome recreation, fun, amusement, entertainment. There sprang up, seemingly overnight, a great wooden hall in Elm Street, on what had been a vacant lot, and there, by day or by night, were to be had music and dancing and hot cakes and magazines and hot coffee and ice cream and girls. Girls. Girls who were straight and slim and young and bright-eyed and companionable. Girls like Angie Hatton. Girls like Betty Weld. Betty Weld, who no longer sat against the wall at the golf club dances and prayed in her heart that fat old Oakley wasn't coming to ask her to dance. Betty Weld was so popular now that the hostess used to have to say to her in a tactful aside, "My dear, you've danced 3 times this evening with the Scarrett boy. You know that's against the rules." Betty knew it. So did Chug. Betty danced so lightly that Chug could hardly feel her in his arms. He told her that she ran sweet and true like the engine of a high-powered car, and with as little apparent effort. She liked that, and understood. It was wonderful how she understood. Chug had never known that girls could understand like that. She talked to you straight, looked at you straight, was interested in the things that interested you. No waist squeezing here, no cheap banter. You even forgot she wore glasses. "I'm going to try to get over." "Say, you don't want to do that." "I certainly do. Why not?" Why, you're too young. You're a girl. I'm as old as you, or almost. They're sending heaps of girls over to work in the canteens and entertain the boys. If they'll take me, I'll have to lie 6 months on my age." Rudy was in charge of the garage now. "That part of it's all right," Chug confided to the well girl. "Only thing that worries me is Ma. She hasn't peeped, hardly, but I can see she's pretty glum, all right." "I don't know your mother," said the well girl. "Tha's so," absent-mindedly from Chug. "I'd like to." Chug woke up. "Why, say, that'd be fine. Listen, why don't you come for Sunday dinner? I've got a hunch we'll shove off next week, and this'll be my last meal away from camp. They haven't said so, but I don't know. Maybe you wouldn't want to, though. We live the other side of the tracks." "I'd love to," said the well girl, "if you think your mother would like to have me." Would she? And cook? Say! The widow Weld made a frightful fuss. She said that patriotism was all right, but that there were limits. Betty put on her organdy and went. It began with cream soup and ended with shortcake. Even Chug realized that his mother had outdone herself. After his second helping of shortcake he leaned back and said, "Death, where is thy sting?" But his mother refused to laugh at that. She couldn't resist telling Miss Weld that it was plain food, but that she hoped she'd enjoyed it. Elizabeth Weld leaned forward. "Mrs. Scarrett, it's the best dinner I've ever eaten." Mrs. Scarrett flushed a little, but protested politely. "Oh, now, you folks up in the East End—" "Not the Wells. Mother and I are as poor as can be. Everybody knows that. We have lots of doilies and silver on the table, but very little to eat. We could never afford a meal like this. We're sort of crackers and tea codfish, really." "Oh, now, Miss Weld—" Chug's mother was aghast at such frankness, but Chug looked at the girl. She looked at him. They smiled understandingly at each other. An hour or so later, after Elizabeth had admired the vegetable garden, the hanging flower baskets, the new parlor curtains— "I used to do 'em up for folks in town," said Mrs. Scarrett, "so's Chug could go to high school." And "I know it. That's what I call splendid," from the girl. She went home, escorted by Chug. Chug's hunch proved a good one. In a week he was gone. 13 months passed before he saw Elizabeth Weld again. When he did, Chippewa had swung back to normal. The railroad tracks were once more boundary lines. Chug Scarrett went to France to fight. 3 months later, Elizabeth Weld went to France to dance. They worked hard at their jobs, these two. Perhaps Elizabeth's task was the more trying. She danced indefatigably, tirelessly, magnificently. Miles and miles and miles of dancing. She danced on rough plank floors with cracks an inch wide between the boards. She danced in hospitals, chateaux, canteens, huts, at Bordeaux, Verdun, Tours, Paris. 5 girls often to 500 boys. Every 2 weeks she danced out a pair of shoes. Her feet, when she went to bed at night, were throbbing, burning, aching, swollen. No hot water. You let them throb and burn and ache and swell until you fell asleep. She danced with big blonde bucks and with little swarthy doughboys from New York's East Side. She danced with privates, lieutenants, captains, and once with a general, but never a dance with Chug. Once or twice she remembered those far-away Chippewa Golf Club dances. She was the girl who used to sit there against the wall. She used to look away with pretended indifference when a man crossed the floor toward her, her heart leaping a little. He would always go to the girl next to her. She would sit there with a set smile on her face and the taste of ashes in her mouth. And those shoddy tulle evening dresses her mother had made her wear. Girlish, she had called them. A girl in thick lensed glasses should not wear tulle evening frocks with a girlish note. Elizabeth had always felt comic in them. Yet there she had sat, shrinking lest the odious Oakley of the fat white fingers and the wheezy breath should ask her to dance. She reflected humorously that if the miles of dancing she had done in the past year were placed end to end, as they do it in the almanac's fascinating facts, they must surely reach to Mars and return. Whenever the hut door opened to admit a tall, graceful, lean, brown figure, her heart would give a little leap and a skip. As the door did this on an average of 1,000 times daily, her cardiac processes might be said to have been alarmingly accelerated. Sometimes, though they did not know it, she and Chug were within a half-hour's ride of each other. In all those months they never met once. Elizabeth Weld came back to Chippewa in June. The First National Bank building seemed to have shrunk, and she thought her mother looked old in that youthful hat, but she was glad to be home and said so. "It's been awful here," said the widow Weld. "Nothing to do but sew at the Red Cross shop, and no sugar or white bread." "It must have been," agreed Elizabeth. "They're giving a dance for you, a dinner, a week from Saturday at the golf club, in your honor." "Dance?" Elizabeth closed her eyes faintly. Then, "Who is?" "Well, Mr. Oakley's really giving it. That is, it was his idea, but the club wanted to tender some fitting—" "I won't go." "Oh, yes, you will." Elizabeth did not argue the point. She had two questions to ask. "Have the boys come back?" "What boys?" The boys." "Some of them. You know about dear Henry Hatton, of course. Crawd—" "What have they done with the Khaki Club, where they used to give the dances?" "Closed long ago. There was some talk of keeping it open for a community center or something, but it fell through. Now, Betty, you'll have to have a dress for Saturday night. I wonder if that old chiffon with a new—" Chug Scarrett came home in September. The First National Bank building seemed somehow to have shrunk, and his mother hadn't had all that gray hair when he left. He put eager questions about the garage. Rudy had made out all right, hadn't he? Good old Scout. "The boys down at the garage are giving some kind of a party for you. Old Rudy was telling me about it. I've got a grand supper for you tonight, Chug." "Where's this party? I don't want any party." "Woodman's Hall, I think they said. There was some girl called up yesterday. Wanda, her name sounded like. I couldn't—" "Don't they give dances any more at the Soldiers Club down on Elm?" "Oh, that's closed long. There was some talk of using it for what they call a community club. The Eagle was boosting for a big new place, what they called a community memorial center, but I don't know, it kind of fell through, I guess." "I won't go," said Chug suddenly. "Go where, Chug?" But instead of answering, Chug put his second question. "Have you seen—is that—I wonder if that Weld girl's back?" "My, yes, paper was full of it. Old Oakley gave her a big dance and all at the country club. They say—" A week later, his arm about Wanda's big, yielding waist, he was dancing at Woodman's Hall. There was about her a cheap, heavy scent. She had on a georgette blouse and high-heeled shoes. She clung to Chug and smiled up at him. Wanda had bad teeth, yellow with a sort of scum over them. "I sure was lonesome for you, Chug. You're some dancer, I'll say. Honest, I could dance with you all night." A little pressure of her arm. Somewhere in the recesses of his brain a memory cell broke loose. Dimly he heard himself saying, "Oh, they all tell me that." "Crazy about yourself, ain't you?" "Not as crazy as I am about you," with tardy gallantry. Then suddenly Chug stopped dancing. He stopped and stepped back from Wanda's arms. Bergstrom's two-piece orchestra was in the throes of its jazziest foxtrot number. Chug stood there a moment in the center of the floor, staring at Wanda's face that was staring back at him in vacuous surprise. He turned, without a word, and crossed the crowded floor, bumping couples blindly as he went. And so down the rickety wooden stairs, into the street, and out into the decent darkness of Chippewa's night. End of The Dancing Girls,